I thought I knew what peace was. That night, as the sun dipped behind the tree line and the lake turned that perfect shade of molten gold, I was sure I'd found it. There I was, alone, or at least that's what I thought, sitting on the worn wooden dock, a small campfire crackling beside me. The smell of burning cedar filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of marshmallows roasting over the flames. The occasional splash of a fish breaking the water's surface felt like nature's gentle applause, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without feeling like the world was closing in. I had no idea this evening would turn into a disaster. I'd spent months trying to get away from the constant nagging of HOA rules. The endless newsletters, the friendly reminders about lawn height, paint colors, and God forbid the type of mailbox I used. I'd learned to laugh it off mostly, but sometimes the absurdity still got under my skin. So when I moved to this little stretch of lakeside paradise, I thought I had finally found a place where no one could tell me how to enjoy a quiet evening. Apparently, I was wrong. It started innocently enough. I was roasting the last marshmallow on my stick, savoring that perfect sticky, when I heard a faint crunch of footsteps on the gravel path behind me. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor, maybe someone walking their dog. I even called out a casual evening, but got no response. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, and I noticed a shadow moving between the trees. Then they appeared. 3 figures stepped into the light of my campfire, clipboard in hand, shoulders squared like soldiers on a mission. And at the front of the group, unmistakable in her neon vest and self-important glare, was the HOA president. My brain literally paused for a second. I wanted to laugh, but the intensity in her eyes suggested that laughter would be a tactical error. "Evening," I said cautiously, trying to sound polite. "Can I help you?" "You can put out this fire immediately," she said, her tone sharp, like she was delivering a federal mandate rather than a friendly suggestion. "Campfires are strictly prohibited in this area." I blinked, waiting for the punchline, but none came. Okay," I started, "but this is on my property." Her eyes narrowed. "This is within HOA jurisdiction. You're on HOA land. You need permission." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice calm. "Actually, I own this property, the lake, the dock, the land surrounding it, all of it." I pointed to the corner of my dock where a small metal sign had once warned trespassers to respect property lines. "This isn't HOA land, it's mine." Her expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened. She gestured to her clipboard as if it alone could override reality. "The rules are the rules, you still need approval." At that moment, a part of me wanted to laugh outright. Another part, let's be honest, the sensible part, was starting to panic. There was something almost surreal about the scene. 3 adults, dressed like suburban enforcers, standing over a man roasting marshmallows on his own property and arguing as if the entire world hinged on a tiny fire pit. Then came the words that made my stomach drop. "I'm calling the police." I froze mid-roast. My marshmallow hovered dangerously above the flames. The campfire crackled like it was laughing at the absurdity of it all. I tried to reason with her, calmly explaining property boundaries, deeds, and legal ownership, but she was already fumbling with her phone, her fingers moving as if she were about to summon an army. That's when I realized it wasn't going to be a quick misunderstanding. This was escalating. My quiet, perfect evening had just turned into a full-blown standoff, and from the way she was muttering about enforcing rules, I had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning. I glanced back at the lake. Its surface shimmered, calm and indifferent, reflecting the sunset in perfect serenity. If only it knew what was about to happen. And that's when I heard it, the faint sound of sirens in the distance. My heart skipped a beat. The HOA hadn't just threatened, they'd actually called for backup. I looked down at my marshmallow again. It wasn't just a snack anymore, it was my last tie to normalcy, the final piece of calm before the storm that was about to engulf me. And I had no idea just how far this was going to go. By the time the HOA president finally finished her phone call, my calm evening had completely evaporated. I could hear the faint hum of engines approaching and my gut sank. Police lights weren't flashing yet, but I knew from experience that once the call went through, there was no turning back. I tried one last time to reason with her. "Look, I own this land, the lake is mine, I'm not breaking any HOA rules, this isn't even, well, it's not your property." She waved me off like my words were background noise. "Sir, you are still violating HOA regulations. Even if you think it's your property, the rules are the rules, you need approval. Campfires require permission from the HOA board and you never got it." I wanted to laugh, but instead I took a deep breath. Permission from a board that doesn't even own the lake. Her eyes narrowed and she leaned in as if I had personally insulted her entire life. "You'll see what happens if you don't comply." At that moment, I noticed movement in the trees across the lawn. Two police cars came into view, lights off for now but ready. I had exactly 3 seconds to decide if I should hide my half-roasted marshmallows or just stare at the approaching law enforcement with a calm face. I did the latter because honestly, what else could I do? The officers stepped out, hands on their belts, scanning the scene. They looked professional but cautious, like they had no idea they were about to be dragged into a suburban turf war over a campfire. The HOA president wasted no time. She stepped forward, pointing at me like a prosecutor in a courtroom drama. "Officer, this man is violating HOA rules. He started a fire on HOA property without permission. We need this addressed immediately." One officer raised an eyebrow. "HOA property?" he asked, glancing at the lake, the dock, and the tiny flames crackling in front of me. "Yes, it's part of the community." She tried to sound confident, but I could see a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had no idea I actually owned this land. I cleared my throat. "Officers, if I may, this property, including the lake, belongs to me. Here's the deed." I held it up, careful not to burn my fingers on the marshmallow stick I was still holding. The officers glanced at each other, surprised, then at the paperwork. The HOA president froze. You could almost see her brain short-circuiting. She muttered something about technicalities and subdivision rules, but her argument was crumbling. The officers turned to me, one squinting at the sunset reflecting off the lake. "So, you own this property?" "Yes," I said, trying not to smirk, "and yes, I was having a campfire." There was a long pause. The crackling of the fire suddenly felt amplified in the tense silence. I could practically hear the HOA president's internal scream as the reality sank in. The lake was mine, not hers. Then the officer cleared his throat, giving me a small nod. "Well, you're within your rights. There's no law being broken here. We can't take action." The HOA president paled. Her clipboard trembled in her hands. That can't be right. The rules are." "I own the property," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "You may enforce rules on your own property, but this is mine, and that includes the lake, the dock, and yes, the fire." The tension was almost palpable. I could see her plotting some kind of comeback, but the officers gave her a polite but unmistakable look that said, "You are on your own here." I finally took a breath, letting the fire's warmth settle around me again. My marshmallow had started to overcook, but I didn't care. This was my victory in the first round. She muttered something about consulting the board and stormed off, leaving me standing there, marshmallow stick in hand, as the officers gave me a reassuring nod and left. The crackle of the fire felt like applause now, tiny sparks jumping in the air as if celebrating my small but significant victory. But as I watched her retreat into the distance, a cold, sinking feeling settled over me. This wasn't over. Oh no, she would be back, and the next time she wouldn't come alone. I glanced at the lake, calm and serene, reflecting the fiery colors of the sunset. It seemed innocent enough, but I knew better. That lake, my lake, had just become the epicenter of a suburban war I hadn't asked for. And deep down, I knew that sitting here, roasting marshmallows and pretending nothing was wrong, was the calm before a storm that was about to get a lot worse. I barely had time to savor my small victory before the situation escalated again. The HOA president wasn't about to accept defeat, and I had a sinking feeling she wasn't done scheming. My marshmallow, slightly charred but still edible, sat forgotten in my hand as I watched her retreat a few steps, only to pull out her phone again. Then I saw them, another pair of police cars, lights flashing faintly this time, rolling down the gravel path to my lakefront property. My heart skipped. 2 cars, 4 officers. This was no longer just a friendly misunderstanding, it was turning into a full-on intervention. I took a deep breath, trying to remind myself that I was on solid ground. Legally, morally, and morally against the absurd, I was right. But even being right doesn't always make things simple when a self-righteous HOA is involved. The officers stepped out cautiously. Their eyes swept over the scene, the small campfire, the lake's still waters reflecting the sunset, the HOA president standing there like she had single-handedly summoned the cavalry. One of them, a tall guy with a skeptical expression, looked at me first. "Evening, sir," he said. "What's going on here?" I gestured at the campfire and tried to keep my tone casual. I was just having a quiet evening by the lake, campfire, marshmallows, some peace and quiet. I nodded toward the HOA president, who was fuming, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. The officer's gaze shifted to her. "Ma'am, this man is violating HOA regulations," she said sharply. "He started a fire on HOA property without permission. We need this addressed immediately." I nearly laughed. HOA property on my property? The thought made me want to drop the marshmallow right there in shock. Officer, if I may, I said carefully, this is my property. I own this land, including the lake and the dock. I have the deed right here. I held up the neatly folded papers. The tall officer raised an eyebrow and glanced at the paperwork. The other 3 officers huddled slightly behind him, giving each other small nods. He flipped open the deed and scanned it quickly. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes hinted at surprise. So he began slowly, you own this property. Yes, I said, feeling a mix of pride and disbelief. And yes, I was having a campfire. There's nothing illegal happening here. The officers looked back at the HOA president. She opened her mouth to argue, but the words faltered on her tongue. For the first time, her confidence seemed shaky. I could almost hear her scrambling inside her own head, trying to find a loophole, a rule, anything to maintain authority. This isn't HOA property, one officer said, more to her than to me. You can't enforce rules on land that doesn't belong to you. She blinked, caught off guard, but the community. Sir, another officer interrupted politely, turning to me. As long as your fire is safe and you're following state or local fire regulations, there's no issue here. I could feel a strange sense of vindication. The tension in the air was almost tangible. My little campfire, once a symbol of peaceful solitude, had now become the stage for a suburban drama of epic proportions. The HOA president's face turned from smug confidence to disbelief, then to frustration, and finally to something close to panic. You can't just do whatever you want, she sputtered. I smiled faintly, though I tried to keep it understated. Apparently I can. The officers gave her one last look, as if silently saying, you're on your own, and then began packing up. My heart was still pounding, but at least the immediate threat had passed. The fire crackled as if mocking the absurdity of the entire scene, sending tiny sparks up into the twilight sky. But even as I watched the police cars disappear down the gravel road, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The HOA president might have lost this round, but she wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. I could see it in her stiff posture, her muttered curses, her sharp, scanning glances at my property. I returned my attention to the lake, letting the gentle waves soothe my nerves. The water reflected the sunset, calm and deceptively peaceful. I wanted to believe that was the end of it, that I could finally enjoy my evening without interruption. But deep down, I knew better. This was only the beginnings. And somewhere in the distance, I could already hear the mental gears turning, plotting her next move. After the police left, I thought I could finally breathe. My campfire crackled quietly, reflecting the sunset on the lake, and I started to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, the chaos had ended. I even tried to take a bite of my slightly overcooked marshmallow, savoring the sweet, sticky moment, but I shouldn't have gotten comfortable. The HOA president didn't just walk away. Oh no, she hovered near the edge of my property, muttering into her phone, clearly plotting her next move. Her every step screamed determination, like a chess player who had just lost a piece but refused to concede the game. I knew it was only a matter of time before she tried to come back at me with more rules, more threats, more absurd demands that had no basis in reality. And that's when I realized I had to stop tiptoeing around the situation. I had to be clear, direct, and undeniable. So I went inside and grabbed the deed. I had kept a copy handy for moments exactly like this, moments where logic, common sense, and property law all collided with the delusions of someone else's authority. I returned to the dock and held it up, the paper slightly fluttering in the evening breeze. Here, I said, my voice calm but firm. This proves it. The lake, the dock, this land, it's all mine, not HOA land, not community property, mine. The HOA president froze mid-step, her phone still in hand. You could almost see the disbelief forming on her face. I swear I could see her mentally recalculating, trying to remember where she went wrong in life to allow a simple campfire to outsmart her. That can't be, she stammered, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. Her words trailed off as she scanned the deed, and I could see her trying to reconcile reality with her long-standing conviction that she ruled this little corner of the world. The suspense hung thick in the air. I wanted to savor this moment. My victory was obvious, but I knew better than to underestimate her. She wasn't going to disappear quietly. I tried to keep my tone measured. You may enforce rules on your property, on your lawns, your driveways, your mailboxes, but this is mine. I follow the law, and I don't need permission from anyone to enjoy my property safely. She looked like she was about to argue further, but her words faltered. Her eyes darted to the lake, the fire, my calm stance, and I could see the realization settling in. She had no authority here. None. I almost laughed. The absurdity of the situation was staggering. Here she was, the self-proclaimed enforcer of community standards, utterly powerless on land that belonged to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been bracing for a battle, but instead I had delivered reality, direct, undeniable, and completely inconvenient for her ego. Still, I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me celebrate too soon. Instead, I let the fire's warmth seep into my hands, letting the crackle and pop of the flames punctuate the moment. The tension was palpable, and I could see her breathing a little heavier, her fingers gripping the phone like it was a lifeline to authority that didn't exist. She finally muttered, half to herself, half to the void, I need to consult the board. That was code for I have no idea what to do next, but I refused to admit defeat. I nodded politely, hiding the smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. Please do, and while you're consulting, I'll continue enjoying my evening. I gestured at the fire, the lake, the perfect sunset reflecting on the water. After all, this is what I'm allowed to do on my property. The suspense didn't fade. I knew she'd return with letters, emails, maybe even threats trying to assert control that didn't exist. The night felt peaceful, but I could sense the storm simmering in the distance. The lake looked calm, but like any great story, the surface was only hiding the tension underneath. I returned my gaze to the fire, letting the small sparks rise into the air like tiny victories. Each pop and crackle reminded me that this was my space, my rules, and my calm, even if the HOA refused to understand it. For a moment, I felt vindicated, powerful even, but I also knew that this was only a single round in what would be an ongoing confrontation. The HOA wasn't done, they never were, and the next time they would come back ready for battle. But for now, the lake was mine, the fire was mine, and my evening, briefly at least, was finally mine. I thought the deed would put an end to it, that my calm, peaceful lake evenings were finally safe. I was wrong, dead wrong. The very next morning, I found a stack of letters on my front porch. They weren't from the mail carrier, they were from the HOA in their signature oversized envelopes filled with bold, menacing fonts and an air of authority that was entirely fabricated. My name was printed on each one like a warning: violation of community standards, immediate attention required, unauthorized use of HOA-regulated areas. I laughed at first until I read the content. They were trying to assert control over my lake. The letters were carefully worded, threatening fines, legal action, and even community sanctions if I continued my little campfire evenings. Each line dripped with self-righteous indignation, as if they had been handed a mandate from the gods themselves to dictate life on my property. I leaned back against my front door, holding the top letter like a prop in some absurd drama. This is incredible, I muttered to myself. They really think they can bully me over my own land. But the humor didn't last long. There was a flicker of unease. They were escalating, and escalation meant they were not going to stop. I could see it in their tone. Every sentence screamed, "We can make your life miserable if we try hard enough." By mid-morning, I had responses drafted in my head. Polite, legal, firm. I knew the HOA couldn't touch me if I stood my ground, but that didn't make the situation any less stressful. It felt like a high-stakes chess game, and they were determined to play dirty. That afternoon, I noticed movement at the edge of my property. One of their board members, an overly enthusiastic woman I'd barely met, was walking along the lakeshore with a clipboard, apparently measuring something. I stared for a moment, wondering if I should call the cops again, but then I realized they had no authority to be there, none whatsoever. My property, my rules. I walked toward her, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Excuse me," I said. "You are on private property. You're not authorized to be here." Her face went pale. She fumbled with her clipboard. "We were just checking." "Checking what?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I own this land, you don't. This is trespassing." Her muttering only made me more aware of the absurdity of the situation. The HOA was now literally wandering onto my property, trying to enforce rules that didn't exist. My pulse quickened, not with fear but with anticipation. This was getting interesting. By evening, the letters had escalated into emails. One even included a threat to report the matter to county authorities unless I cease all unauthorized activity immediately. I could practically hear them whispering in unison, "We will force compliance." I took a deep breath and walked to the dock. The lake stretched out before me, calm and indifferent. I sat down beside the fire, letting the tension of the day seep into the night air. Sparks rose from the flames, dancing like tiny, fiery reminders that I wasn't backing down. I let myself smile. They could write all the letters they wanted. They could threaten, harass, and plot, but nothing would change the fact that I own this land. But even as I settled in, a cold realization crept in. This wasn't just about a campfire anymore. It was about principle, about ego, And the HOA had both in spades. Their next move could be anything: more letters, more people wandering onto my property, maybe even a legal attempt to bully me. I glanced at the lake one more time. The water shimmered under the moonlight, deceptively peaceful. I knew better. This was far from over. The HOA was relentless, and I had to be ready. I had to anticipate their next move. And so, as the fire crackled beside me, I made a silent promise. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me. Not now, not ever. They wanted a battle, fine, they would get one. But I would fight it on my terms, from the safety of my own property, marshmallow in hand, fire glowing, and the lake reflecting the stars like my personal shield. The suspense lingered, thick in the night air. Every rustle in the trees, every distant car engine felt like a potential threat. And somewhere in the shadows, I knew the HOA was already plotting their next move, convinced that I could be forced to comply. I just smiled and took a bite of my marshmallow, sweet and slightly charred, thinking, bring it on. The next few days were a test of patience I didn't know I had. Every time I stepped outside, I half expected to see the HOA president lurking behind a tree, clipboard in hand, ready to lecture me on community standards. The letters kept coming, some scrawled in a desperate attempt at authority, others typed with that cold, bureaucratic menace only an HOA can deliver. Each one was a little stab at my calm and a little challenge to my sanity. I realized it was time to prepare, not for war, I don't like war, but for the inevitable showdown. I gathered every document I could find proving my ownership of the property, from old deeds to tax records. I made sure to have copies in every room, my truck, even my pockets. I knew the HOA would try every angle, every loophole, every shred of imagined authority. I had to be ready. I also did something I hadn't done before. I scoped out the perimeter of my land. I walked the shoreline, inspected the boundaries, made sure every sign, post, and marker was in place. This wasn't paranoia, it was strategy. The HOA thrived on confusion and fear. They liked to blur the lines until you questioned your own rights. I wasn't going to let that happen. By midweek, the tension had become almost tangible. Even the lake seemed to sense it, the water reflecting the gray skis above with an unusual sheen, like nature itself was holding its breath. I'd lit my campfire every night, just small and controlled, to remind myself that I still had control. But I also used it as a sort of beacon, a signal. I wasn't backing down. And then it happened. A knock at the dock, not just a casual tap, but a firm, insistent rapping that carried across the water. I froze, my heart rate spiked. I knew that sound. I'd heard it before, but this time it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The HOA was back. I peered over the edge of the dock and saw them. The president, flanked by 2 board members, all looking impossibly confident. The clipboard was out again, the phones ready. They had clearly spent days plotting this moment, convinced they could intimidate me into compliance. I didn't move right away. Instead, I watched, letting them make the first move. The suspense was delicious. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. We will finally take control. He will obey. This is our victory. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm and steady as I called out, "Evening, can I help you?" The president stepped forward, pointing at the fire. "Sir, this fire is unauthorized. We've sent notices. We've documented the violations. You need to put it out immediately." I kept my tone light, almost conversational. "I've read your notices. I own this property. This fire is legal and safe. There's nothing here that violates any law or regulation." Her confidence faltered for just a second, and I seized it. "You're welcome to look at the deed again," I added, holding it up casually. "It's right here, proving this lake, this dock, this entire area is mine, not HOA property." The moment stretched, silence. The wind carried the faint crackle of the fire, the occasional ripple of water across the lake, and for a heartbeat it felt like time had stopped. The board members exchanged nervous glances, the president muttered something under her breath, and I felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. I could sense the suspense rising, not just for me but for them. They were realizing slowly that their entire plan was collapsing, yet they weren't ready to admit it, not yet. I leaned back slightly, letting the fire's warmth calm my nerves. "You can consult your records, call whoever you like, or even bring the county in. I'm within my rights, I've done nothing wrong." The president's jaw tightened. I could almost hear her plotting a new move, a final attempt to assert control. But this time I was ready, calm, prepared, unwavering. As they backed off a few steps, muttering, I allowed myself a small smile. The lake was mine, the fire was mine, and I was ready for whatever they tried next. The suspense lingered, heavy in the air, because I knew this wasn't the end. The showdown had begun, and the next move could come at any moment. I was ready, I had to be. And so I sat by my campfire, the lake stretching before me, every spark rising like tiny alarms, reminding me that the next confrontation was inevitable. The next morning, I woke to a strange sense of anticipation. The lake looked calm, the sun reflecting off the water like a mirror, but the tension was palpable. I knew they were coming back. I could feel it in the letters, the phone calls, the way the HOA president's name kept appearing in my inbox like a persistent shadow. By mid-afternoon, the knock at the dock came again. This time, it wasn't subtle. The president arrived flanked by 2 board members, all bristling with authority, or at least the illusion of it. They had clipboards, cameras, and enough paperwork to build a small fort. I watched them from the dock, my campfire crackling between us, the sparks rising like tiny warnings into the afternoon sky. I took a deep breath, calm, measured, confident. "Good afternoon," I said, keeping my tone casual though my heart raced. "Can I help you?" The president stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "You are in direct violation of community rules. We've documented this activity. We expect immediate compliance." I gestured at the fire, letting the smoke curl lazily into the air. "This is on my property. I have done nothing illegal. I've shown the deed. I'm happy to explain it again if you need." There was a beat of silence, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was furious, and that fury made her predictable. She pointed to my dock, her voice rising. "You cannot just do whatever you want. The rules are the rules." I smiled faintly. "I'm afraid in this case, the rules don't apply to someone who owns the land. You're welcome to consult your attorney, bring the county authorities, even contact the state, but nothing here is illegal." Her hands trembled slightly on her clipboard. The board members looked increasingly uncomfortable, shuffling papers as if their authority could be reinforced with sheer force of will. I could almost see the panic rising behind their eyes. This was the moment reality collided with their self-importance. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. I calmly pulled out a copy of the deed and handed it to the president. She took it reluctantly, scanning it like it was written in a foreign language. Her face turned pale as the truth finally sank in. The lake, the dock, the fire, it was all mine. She had no claim, no authority, no leg to stand on. I watched her struggle for words, muttering something about technicalities and board decisions. Her board members avoided eye contact, shifting uneasily on their feet. The tension was almost cinematic, the calm, collected lake in contrast with the chaos of human ego unraveling before me. "You see," I said, keeping my tone friendly but firm, "I've done nothing wrong. I own this property, the fire is safe, and the lake entirely mine." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might try a last desperate move. But then she muttered something under her breath and stormed toward her car, the board members following like reluctant accomplices. I could hear them whispering about rules that didn't exist, their pride wounded more than their authority. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The fire crackled between us, small sparks rising like tiny celebrations. I had won this round decisively. The HOA had been humiliated, and I hadn't lifted a finger in anger, only in calm, quiet authority. But the tension didn't fully dissipate. I knew the HOA president was the type to keep planning, to keep plotting ways to assert power even when the law was firmly on my side. I could feel it in the weight of the silence that followed her departure, the knowledge that though this confrontation was over, the story wasn't finished. I sat back on the dock, letting the warmth of the fire settle into my bones. The lake shimmered under the late afternoon sun, deceptively peaceful, hiding the human drama that had just unfolded. I allowed myself a small, private smile. Victory tasted sweet, even if it was tinged with the awareness that the next attempt at confrontation could come at any time. And yet, for the first time in days, I felt a deep sense of calm. I had faced the absurdity, the aggression, and the arrogance of the HOA, and I had not only survived, I had won. My lake, my fire, my evenings, they were mine. I leaned back, letting the breeze carry away the tension, watching the sparks rise into the sky, and thought to myself, sometimes the greatest victories are the quietest. The HOA had been humiliated, but they had also learned something important. Boundaries are real, ownership is undeniable, and sometimes calm persistence is more powerful than any amount of rage or authority. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the lake in gold and orange, I knew that whatever came next, I would be ready. I thought that after the confrontation, things would finally calm down, that the HOA would lick their wounds, accept defeat, and move on. But that's not how power-hungry people operate. When people like that lose control, they don't reflect, they plot. And sure enough, a few days later, I saw them again. This time, they weren't storming onto my property with clipboards or printed violations. They were parked just outside my gate in their SUVs, talking, pointing, and probably scheming. From the distance, they looked like a council of supervillains who had just realized their secret plan had a fatal flaw. The lake wasn't theirs. I didn't engage, not yet. I wanted to see how far they'd go. The next morning, I woke up to find a fresh notice of violation taped to my fence. In big red block letters, it read, "Illegal structure, dock unapproved by HOA." I stared at it for a good 30 seconds before laughing so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. My dock had been there since before the HOA even existed. They were grasping at straws now, desperate to reassert their authority, even if it meant rewriting history. So I did what any rational man with a sense of humor would do. I framed it. I took that red letter violation, put it in a nice wooden frame, and hung it right by the window that faced the lake. A little reminder of what happens when ego meets reality. But I wasn't done. See, there's a part of me that believes in peaceful resistance, but there's also a part that enjoys poetic justice. So I made a few calls to the county office, to a land surveyor, and to a lawyer friend who owed me a favor. Within a week, I had everything documented and notarized. My property lines, my lake rights, and even the county's written acknowledgement that the HOA had no jurisdiction whatsoever over my land or the water. And then I sent copies of those documents to every single HOA board member. Each envelope was neatly labeled, professionally sealed, and contained a note that simply read, "For your records, consider this your final notice." I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one, but the silence that followed was its own kind of victory. A few evenings later, as I sat by my campfire, I noticed movement across the lake. Flashlights, voices. It was them again, the HOA president and a few of her loyalists standing on their side, whispering and gesturing toward my dock. I could hear bits and pieces. "He can't just, the lake's connected, there must be something." I smiled and raised my coffee mug in a mock salute. They froze, realizing I was watching, then turned and disappeared into the trees. It was the last time they ever tried to confront me. Funny thing, though, the story didn't end in bitterness. It ended in quiet satisfaction. Over the next few months, the HOA stopped sending letters. The board members avoided my property. Even the president, who used to walk past with that judgmental glare, started taking a different route altogether. I guess it's hard to look someone in the eye after you've tried and failed to take their lake. But every once in a while, I'd catch a new homeowner walking by, curious about the property line or the shimmering water, and they'd ask, "Hey, is it true the HOA tried to fine you for your own lake?" I'd grin, nod, and say, "Oh yeah, they even called the cops once." Their eyes would widen. "What happened?" And I'd lean back, poke the fire, and say, "They found out the lake wasn't theirs." The laughter that followed always made it worth it, because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about property lines or campfires. It was about standing up to people who think authority equals ownership. It was about reminding them that sometimes the little guy with a campfire and a deed can outsmart an entire board armed with clipboards and bylaws. Now, every time I light that fire, I can't help but think about how far things went over something so small. But maybe that's just how HOAs work. They turn peace into paperwork. I took a deep breath, watching the flames flicker across the lake's surface, and smiled to myself. The water was calm again. The fire was warm. And for the first time in months, the silence wasn't tense, it was peaceful. My lake, my fire, my story. And if the HOA ever forgot that again, well, I had plenty of marshmallows left and a framed violation notice that said it all. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.